Hi, I'm Malika Bilal in for Fimi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, a tough topic, South Korea's high suicide rate. What's pushing so many Koreans towards death, and what's being done to stop the trend? With me is May Al Hassan, filling in as digital producer all week. May, I know that one thing I noticed, at least online, was there was a hesitancy about how this would be covered, how we would cover this on the stream.
Yeah, people are asking us why we're singling out South Korea. They feel like that because we're only focusing on South Korea, they're concerned that we might be privileging social and cultural stereotypes to explain this phenomenon. Chris tweets, "Can't stand it when people say Koreans commit suicide because Confucius." He continues, "I also reflexively cringe at lazy stereotyping about authoritarianism." And then Joseph sums it up by saying, "I think the issue goes beyond social norms or expectations and is far more complex." And we want to honor that complexity and be sensitive to the conversation today. So we also want to encourage you to jump in and join the conversation by tweeting us during the show by using the hashtag AJStream.
And as May mentioned, you can reach us on Twitter, where we're also following these stories. Suicide capital of the developed world. It's a disheartening label, but one that is all too real for South Korea. The headlines are morbid and many, because some 40 Koreans commit suicide every day. Take a look at this chart. South Korea by far has the highest rate, nearly 3 times that of the United States and 10 times that of Greece. And this self-murder trend doesn't discriminate, crossing the gender and age gap, with young people and the elderly being the most susceptible. It's the leading cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds, and more than half of all teenagers admit to having suicidal thoughts. To help us understand what's going on, we're joined in Seoul by Ju-ae Lee, an activist. Jun Young Lee, program officer with Rainbow Teen Safe Space. Also in Seoul, Jeffrey Kane, a correspondent with Global Post, who's written extensively about suicides in South Korea. And in Pennsylvania, B.C. Ben Park, sociologist at Penn State University at Brandywine. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Well, Ju-ae, I want to start with you. Hello. This is a very personal issue for you, Ju-ae. Will you share your story with us?
Sure. When I was growing up, especially when I'm thinking about my teenage years, I would never really want to go back to that period. Although I'm sure there are some happy moments, I just think of it as a very dark period because of something that I wanted to do with my life totally didn't match what my parents wanted for me. So I would often think about ending my life. So that's something that this is something very personal to me, and I would feel really bad whenever I see people that will drive them to the point that they want to end their life themselves. So I guess this is why I am participating in the program, partially.
Do you feel comfortable explaining what it is, the discrepancy that you felt with between you and your parents, what it was that you were going through at that time?
To be honest, at the time, all I really wanted to do was to learn to play the piano. But my parents wanted me to become either a lawyer or a doctor, which is like what a lot of parents want for their children in Korea. They didn't even really let me play or learn to play the piano. So I'm just thinking they just let me take piano lessons. I would probably be a lawyer now because I would get it out of my system, and then maybe it's not something that I really, really want that couldn't have, So I wonder, that's something that happened, I guess, for the most of my teenage years.
And those thoughts were in your teenage years, but you don't have them anymore.
I actually don't for some reason, and I feel like after when I went to college, I was able to do kind of pursue what I wanted to pursue, which was not really music, but it was something that that I was like I studied films, which was another like a medium where I could like express my thoughts. So I kind of like got it out of my system, I would say. I needed that. So.
Jun Young, I want to go to you because, Jue was talking about how this was a symptom of her younger years, her childhood years. You speak to teens daily as part of your work and the work that you do. What do these teenagers tell you?
To be honest, most of the teenagers that I have in contact with are those who are in risk and who have no counselors that they can talk to. They're having a very hard time to express their thoughts and their feelings, and so I actually encounter those who are having a very tough time at their schools, in their families, sometimes in their churches, in other religious groups, and it's really heartbreaking to hear their stories that they really cannot even pass a single day without thinking about whether I should just leave this world.
Jun Young,
Yes?
I wanna stick to this point. There's some tweets addressing this. Jawan, I'm sorry, I'm butchering your name. He tweets, high rate of suicide can be related with so many social issues happening here in South Korea. He even admits, I once suffered on this during a teenager, and he said, when I heard my military colleague committed suicide, I felt why the society can't give us anything better. So the question is, what sort of personal stories have you heard, and what are they relating their feelings and desires of suicide to?
I think they're more relating. That's a really tough question because I think it depends on what type of people, in what of the society they are. Like, for instance, if we're talking about the military, I think the real reason is because that every Korean man has to go to mandatory military service. And so because of that, there is some oppression or some, I think, psychological oppression that one can deal with. I normally meet teenagers in schools that are really having a tough time, especially with their sexual orientation. So I'm also talking with those who are not only dealing with their identity, but trying to overcome the oppression that the society have over their sexual orientation.
Well, Ben, you're a sociologist. Why do we see this happening? What's the reasoning behind this?
Well, majority of Koreans live under a lot of stress. Stress is not job related per se, although many Koreans work longer hours. But majority of stress stemming from relationship. In Korea, relationship is very important. The Koreans are generally gregarious people. They work hard at their relationship, and they feel very vulnerable if they lack a social network or personal connections with other people outside of their home or inside of their home. In some ways, social connection is important for their survival. This is one reason many young people feel pressured by their parents to enter into a prestigious universities in Seoul. And so once they entered in being a alumnus of those prestigious schools, they are automatically connected to a powerful elite group in Korea.
Right. Well, Jeff, how do we then deal with those pressures? What you're reporting on this? What are you seeing and hearing?
Well, the government has been making some efforts recently to curb the suicide rate, and actually, in 2012, the suicide rate did fall a bit. It fell off, but it didn't fall off very much. And the government says that it's implemented a number of programs to help people who are considering suicide. So, for example, there's a new service here, a pretty new service called Lifeline Korea, a hotline, and there's the government says that there's better monitoring of potential suicides, and there have been quite a few efforts here in Seoul. There's a bridge called the Mapo Bridge, and this is a massive, an expansive bridge at the Han River, and this is known as the Bridge of Death because it's one of the favorite places for Koreans who want to go jump off and kill themselves. Every year, dozens of people jump off. Not all of them die. I think last year about a half dozen were successful. But the government, the city government of Seoul, has implemented a program in which they put signs up that say, you know, I love you and let's walk together. And they have statues of people comforting each other, pictures.
Do they work?
And,
Do you think that they work? In your experience, seeing a sign that says, I love you, will that stop someone from jumping off the bridge?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, the bridge is controversial, and some people have told me, some psychologists here have said that it's a bad idea because it strengthens the association with death, the association with suicide. But at the same time, the city government of Seoul says that you know, it actually has led to a decrease in the number of successful suicides, while the number of recorded suicide attempts has been increasing. I think the number is that it's quadrupled since this program was first put together.
Jue, it sounds like
I
you wanted to
agree.
jump in.
I'm sorry.
No,
yeah,
please.
I guess yeah, just the thing is, like, I thought about this bridge a lot, and then I thought that it was really funny because, you know, if I'm just thinking about myself, like, okay, I'm gonna go there and then I'm gonna die, and then I see this message saying like I love you, but then like nobody in my life will actually say I love you to me. But then like I see this message popping up in the bridge, I feel like it's gonna be actually it's making a mockery of me somehow. Like I might even feel more angry. I cannot actually imagine what that would feel like, but that's my personal feeling. And I think the thing about the city of Seoul government is doing, I think they're doing it for the right reason, but at the same time they're only focusing about the event, about, you know, suicide. They suicide as an event, but suicide is more about process. There's a reason why people like have these suicidal thoughts, you know. So instead of tackling the reasons as to why people want to like walk that path, like, I'm thinking that they're only focusing on their destination at the last moment,
Yes.
you know, like. So I wonder.
I see the professor shaking his head. I want to go to him in a bit, especially because I want him to pick up on what was just said, that no one says I love you in my life. That's something I'm interested in, but of course I want to get the community in because I know that they are tweeting up a storm on this.
Yeah, they're definitely focusing in on the process and the societal pressures. And I want to get Jue and Jun Young to come into this conversation because they really want to know about education and the pressures with the education system. We have tweets and we have a video comment. We have a tweet from Elizabeth that said she lived in Korea from 2008 to 2009. Korean kids live with an extreme pressure to conform and to do exceptionally well in education. She says it's sad, continues, almost to an extreme, where kids aren't allowed to be kids. The kids I tutored had school for 4 hours after the real school. And we have a video comment from Rachel.
Having taught English in South Korea, I think that the main factor that drives young people to suicide in Korea is what's called education fever, or the tremendous pressure to succeed in school. This starts even at a young age. My elementary students would often stay up until midnight studying, and I think eventually this just builds up and kids have feelings of hopelessness and that they can't do well enough to make something of their life eventually.
Jun Young, is it a case of education fever? Are kids not allowed to be kids? What do you feel like your personal experience was?
Yes, I definitely agree with that because when I was actually in my middle school, high school period, as a high school student, I went through that same schedule, go to school by 7:30 a.m. and then come back around 4 p.m. or probably back then I must have studied much longer. But then there's this institute that it's called hagwons, and kids would go to classes at different places like an institute, and then you will stay there until like 7 p.m. or even longer than that, have dinner at home, and then you study late at night until midnight. The thing is that it seems as if kids are just in this loop, that they are going to point, to school, to institute, to home, and then they're doing this whole cycle all around again, and they have no time to think about themselves. They have no time to think about what they want to do in the future. So I think they keep it lost, literally. And I think this is a very vicious cycle.
Right. Ben, you've been nodding your head along. I'm curious what you're thinking.
I agree with that, but also in old days, people study hard, but they did not think about committing suicide. In modern day, in modern Korea, young people, including older people, the rate of increase of suicide among elderly are far greater, 6.7 times compared to younger people.
So what's the difference? What has happened? What's changed so that we're seeing this difference?
Cause of the suicide is hard to pinpoint, but we need to look at the increase, the sharp increase, and that indicate that there's something going wrong in society. There's a pathological conditions, and we need to focus on that pathology and remove that pathological condition. Then we might be able to reduce suicide rates.
Ju-A?
Yeah, I was having a conversation about this because, like, you know, people commit suicide all the time. It's not anything new, but like I was shocked that, like, you know, the rate has like increased like by 3 times over the last 20 years. And then why do you think that is? Like, I asked my dad, and he's like, well, back in the days, it was more like, you know, people were just like really busy trying to survive, and then they had to kind of like deal with things on their own. But then, like, when I was born, around that time, the government had a policy where, like, you know, we're only gonna, like, you know, where the household, they only have like 2 children and no more, that type of trend. And then the family and then parents, they will do everything for them, you know, because they're so precious. So like kids these days, they don't have the ability to deal with their own issues on their own. Like, they don't take the ownership of their own issue, and they don't realize that they have the power to deal with their issues. So like, you know, always thinking that, okay, you know, if you feel powerless, there is always a you know, way for you to like get past that. But instead of thinking that way, it was like, you know, I'm helpless.
Right.
What else can I do?
I also want to mention, in a very social aspect of this, I think it's a very good point, but I also want to add that one of the things that actually I think that tremendously changed in the current society is that the middle class literally disappeared in our society, which basically makes those who are having an average amount of income that they cannot really support not only themselves, but they kind of lose their social status of supporting their children and their spouses and their family, literally. And I think because of that, there are, since Professor Ben has mentioned it, the suicide rates of people who are older has actually increased, and I think the society change has had a big effect on that.
Jun Young, you might be telepathically in conversation with some of our Twitter community because they are pointing to income inequality. Jay, he says South Korea is the world's 13th largest economy. However, economic plight is truly the main cause of suicides, income inequality, and he continues, narrowing the gap between the haves and the have-nots is a priority. Over 4 million are under the level of poverty. There seems no hope. We even have a video comment from Amy in South Korea on industrialization.
It's easy to see this as a uniquely Korean problem and to make moral judgments from an international perspective. But nothing in Korea or anywhere else happens in a sociocultural vacuum. Korea's rapid economic development has been built upon Western capitalistic models and is still heavily influenced by its US military occupation. Instead of looking at this phenomenon from a safe distance, I hope we can critically examine our part that establishes global economic systems that force other nations to conform to these structures in order to compete, and its impact on all of our sense of well-being.
Jeff, I know that you have spoken about about industrialization and Western hegemonic economic values. Is this what's playing the role in this suicide rate?
Somewhat. It's I think it's complicated. If we look at the history of South Korea's suicide rate, in the 1980s, it was actually pretty low. I have a number here. In 1986, it was about 6.6 suicides per 100,000 people. In 1995, now in the 1990s, this is when Korea joined the OECD, the Club of Developed Nations. In 1996, they became a member. In 1995, it was 10.8 per 100,000. And now this is interesting because in 1997, Korea experienced a massive financial crisis that basically reconfigured its society, ended any promise of lifetime work, Several, many people lost their jobs. Several big corporations collapsed, and there was a giant international intervention. The following year, suicide spiked up to 23 per 100,000 people. So that's more than double from 3 years before that. Now, since the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Korea has never really gone back to the days of roaring growth, to the days of great hopes for the future. And the suicide rate it rose over the next decade, and it's interesting because in 2012 it fell slightly, but I mean the overall trend is still there.
And Jeff,
And,
I mean, it actually looks like you're reading us stats, which I love. You're a journalist. I do love that. But the one thing about this conversation is that it tugs at the heartstrings. And so we're having this conversation. We're hearing from community. We're hearing these stories. People that are watching may want to know, where do we go from here? What do we do? Of course, from our main social media accounts, we will be tweeting out and are tweeting out hotlines, numbers that you can call if you do feel powerless, as Jue mentioned, that feeling of powerlessness. Jue, I want to go to you because for those who are watching, who may not be on Twitter, who may not be looking at the hotlines where we're sending out, where do they turn? What do they do?
I think it's really important to feel that you're not alone in feeling alone, and then trust that there are people who are going through the similar things that you're going through, and be able to reach out for help if you need. And it's important to believe that you have that support. But somehow I feel like our society really endorses competition, where people don't believe that they can work together or live together. And then if you want to go move ahead in a society, you have to kind of push other person down. And I just wish there was a way somehow to promote that we can live together, and this will be a long process, and I'm not sure actually.
Jun Young, what about you? What do you tell people?
First of all, I actually say the first thing that actually I say to the teenagers that I encounter with is that do not even try to be perfect. I think there is this kind of perfect syndrome that is going around in teenagers, that they have to be perfect, they have to be good in their schools, they have to be good looking, they have to have a good job, they have to go to a good university. And it's not good, actually. It's perfect is what they have in their minds. And so I try to plant that image that you do not need to be perfect. You do not have to strive for that. I think it starts from there. And eventually, when people see that our education system is actually not only pushing our students, but choking our students, then I think we can make a huge different atmosphere in our education sector.
Choking our students, May. This is fascinating. I know that we are running out of time, but can you give us a little tease of what we can look forward to in the post show, what people are saying online?
We got this question from Will. Is family honor still the elephant in this room?
Family honor. I'd like all of our guests to think about that. But before we end this discussion, I want to play a clip from a popular Korean video blogger. She goes by the name of Professor O. I see some of our guests nodding their heads. They know her. She's prominent. Her YouTube videos get hundreds of thousands of clips. And there's one in particular that I found particularly uplifting, especially for this conversation. Have a look at this.
We're not robots. We're humans. Social animals. We crave interaction and one another's attention. At the end of the day, it's not about having the highest score. We all just want a little bit of love and happiness in our lives. So don't let society tell you how to measure your worth.
Don't let society tell you how to measure your worth. Man, it's a message that I'm going to take home with me. What's our community saying? So
our community commented on the Mapo Bridge, and it says it's a really good example of the Korean government treating the symptoms rather than the cause of suicide. So hopefully we can focus in on some solutions that the government can take.
Right, and of course we reached out to the government and they declined our requests. We'll talk about that in the post show. And on the next show, a parliament occupied by student protesters. We turn to Taiwan, look at why so many young people think a Chinese trade deal will hurt their country's sovereignty. Stay with us. Post show is next. Welcome back to the Stream's online post show. We're discussing the high suicide rate in South Korea. Now, before we ended, we were talking about government initiatives, what could be done. That's what our community wants to talk about. May, what exactly are they saying?
We ended with the tweet about the Mapo Bridge being a great example of the Korean government treating the symptoms rather than the cause of suicide. Jeff, what do you feel like the government can do?
Well, I think overall there needs to be an expansion of welfare in South Korea, a far broader expansion. I think that right now the government, a lot of government officials really hand off the burden to the family, and this has become an issue here because it puts a lot of stress on people. I just think that an expansion of individual-based welfare would probably lead to a further drop in the suicide rate and also any other social malaise that affects this country.
And Ben,
Yeah.
what about looking at this from a mental health issue? Is that something that is being taken up?
Well, mental health issue is very important, and most theories focus on here in Western part. In Korean case, I think a mental disorder cause suicide is a bit premature because there are other social factors that contribute to this suicidal epidemic. I think I need to have people focus on the cultural aspect. In my own opinion, I'm sorry to use this, Korean society has lost its soul in the pursuit of a material comfort. I think the lost soul means that they lost their culture. They abandoned, they adopted the westernized culture, but it doesn't fit in their body.
Professor,
Yes.
if you don't mind the interruption, when was the last time you were in South Korea?
Last summer,
Last summer.
yes.
And do you find that sentiment that South Korean society has lost its soul, that's your quote, does that permeate with family members that may still be there? Do you think that they believe the same thing?
Well, my study shows that conflicting family relationship is the one of the significant risk factor for suicidal behavior. And so there are a lot of conflict is being observed in the family. And conflict is because of the two conflicting cultural assumptions. Younger people are striving for Western ideals of autonomy and self-fulfillment and self-advocacy. But older generation are still holding on to the Confucian age and gender hierarchical institution. And also we need to look at that Korean society, the informal organization is ruling the society. And formally in education and in economy, they hear that fair competition and everybody has an equal chance. But underneath the surface, who rules the Korean society? Those people who are interconnected with each other in the power elite group, and
Right.
they are informally connected, and then they rule, and they are holding on to the old value system,
Right.
which is
Yeah,
mutual.
Ben, I hear you when you talk about this dichotomy of East and West culture. Jue, I saw you reacting to the tweet that I read in the show, ending the show, where Will had asked, is family honor still the elephant in this room? And then we had some conversation on Facebook. James said suicide was once a taboo, now it's acceptable, even noble or honorable in the society. Not sure how this started, but the increasing frequency of suicide among public figures makes the general public numb to this epidemic. Whereas Rick had mentioned that South Koreans personally know or have heard of someone close die of suicide. There's a huge social stigma against people who commit suicide. Families will often request the mortician to announce the cause of death as something medical. Jue, what role does honor and shame play in suicides?
I mean, family honor itself, it was something that I never really identified with in terms of as a reason for someone to kill themselves, but it must be something, especially for elderlies. That's what my dad said, something like for older people, they don't want to be like a burden for their family, and that could be maybe associated with like a family honor. But God, like in terms of, I forget what the tweet was actually. That you just mentioned. Can you remind me?
Yes, Will says, is family honor still the elephant in this room? And
not that one, but the next one, the other one. Sorry.
About the social stigma around?
Yes, definitely, yes. Because I don't know, like life and death, I don't know, death is part of life, right? And then people like thinking about like killing themselves, it's not something that like they're bad. I feel like it should be being accepted, like in a way that not like suicide as an option, but suicide is something that is a very real issue that people feel. I feel like that's something that we must to face first in order for us to deal with that issue, rather than something as a taboo or stigma.
Sorry, I just wanted to get Jun Young into this conversation. What are your thoughts about honor, shame, suicide?
I think it actually hinders. It makes all Koreans actually a little bit more less able to express their feelings and say that it's okay, because the real problem that I think a lot of Koreans, when they even talk about the suicide issue, is that they neglect the fact that it is okay, and they always try to strive at a certain goal or a certain level or a certain image. The thing is that family honor, I think it holds back the whole idea that it is okay, and rather inputs an idea that you have to live a certain life instead of saying that you are okay.
You know, just because you said that living a certain life, that triggered a memory. I have a clip here on my screen. This is from the news organization Vice. I want to play this. This is one of their reporters went to South Korea. She's from Japan. She went to South Korea to experience this phenomenon that's being called fake funerals. And it begs the question of whether or not death is being sensationalized. I want all of our guests to have a listen to this clip where she speaks to a dentist in Gangnam. Have a listen.
때문에 사실은 강남에서 성공하려고 하는 의사이기보다는 아버지로서 최선을 다하고 싶어서 이렇게 한 중심가에 선택을 하게 되었습니다. 또 경쟁이 아주 치열합니다. 그래서 한국은 여러분도 아시다시피 세계적으로 아마 의술은 꽤 발달되어 있지만 날마다 일어나는 것 자체가 고통이었는데, 물론 가족적으로는 가정은 제가 매우 사랑합니다만은 이 가정을 보호하기 위한 뭔가를 치유를 좀 내 자신한테 뭔가를 상을 좀 줘야 되겠다. 그 상이 뭘까? 나를 좀 편하게
So Jue, he mentions competition. Some say that experiences like this, these fake funerals, allow people to appreciate life. Is this necessary? Do you think that this would allow more young people in Korea to appreciate what they have?
So not so much about fake funerals, but I thought about maybe writing your obituary. Your own obituary might be like maybe similar to having a fake funeral, I guess. And then that could be something that would be helpful. I wonder if that would actually answer the question, because I think you mentioned something about the competition. Maybe be able to like release, like maybe what you were always envisioning, and maybe you'll stop romanticizing about it, I guess.
Is that
to be honest,
I just wonder if that's something, do you think that would have helped you in your childhood, Jue?
God, that's a very hard question to answer. I would say perhaps, yes, but I don't know. I can't really say yes or no to this one. It's very difficult.
Jun Young, was that you trying to say something?
Actually, I think what actually happens during the fake funerals, I've witnessed a fake funeral myself, and I've met students who've actually been to fake funerals. And the thing is that they say that after the whole thing is over, they have to go back to their normal lives. They have to go back to school, they have to go back to institutes, they have to do their studying anyway. So the thing is that I don't think it actually gives that much of an experience for them to realize, to appreciate life. I think what they do is it's just an exit. It's just a pent-up release type of an outlet just for like a couple of hours, and then you have to go back to your normal life. To be honest, I don't think this really helps.
I want to end this on a hopeful note, of course, because this was a hard, heavy, serious topic. Before I go to all of you for your ending notes, I do want to take a look at my computer here. This is suicide.org. This is a list of several different countries, and you can click on the countries and then find information for how to get help, how to speak to someone if you are feeling powerless, if you are feeling like that you have no one else to speak to. But Jue, I would like to wrap this up, doing a little round table. What are your thoughts for someone who may be watching this who needs to hear what you're about to say? What would you tell them?
Oh God, it's really hard to, I mean, I feel irresponsible for just saying this, and I wonder if this will be really helpful, but I really want to repeat this message saying that if you feel alone, that just really, really know that you're not alone, and you'll be surprised sometimes if you have the courage to believe that, to reach out, and then someone that you really love, then there might be solutions. I like recently also had this feeling that I felt really alone, but I was actually telling someone I feel alone, and then they were feeling terrible, and then they wanted to really, help me, and then that was something that helped me through the time. So like to have the courage to admit that you're having a rough time and you feel alone, and be able to verbalize that
to someone else. Right. Jeff, what about you? Your ending sentence, because we're running out of time. Go ahead.
Well, there are places that you can go in Korea. I mean, if you are having these thoughts, there is Lifeline Korea. You can call this number. It's 1588-9191. So there are services out there that can help. I mean, if people are feeling this, they're not alone. There are places to go. And
we can definitely tweet that out. Ben Park, your ending sentence, what would you tell people?
I would say to policymakers, they need to think about healthy ways to develop self-identity and give out the thread that connect the past, present, and future for everybody.
And June Young, what about you?
Yes, whether you lost your job, whether you are in an oppressed situation, whether you are in the minorities, when you are in the marginals, I want to say that it is okay to be who you are.
Love that. May?
We have an ending tweet from Saeed. He says, suicide can only be curbed by raising awareness among people, and people should manage to get counseling they need in time. And hopefully this conversation was that open forum, and hopefully things will change.
Well, I want to thank all of our guests. Thanks, of course, to our community. Thanks to Jue Lee, June Young Lee, Jeffrey Kane, and Ben Park. On the next show, a parliament occupied by student protesters. We turn to Taiwan and look at why so many young people think a Chinese trade deal will hurt their country's sovereignty. We'll see you online.